Hello, my name is Jackie Gonzalez. We are here to talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect. We begin today with a quote by Charles Darwin: "Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge," which will be discussed as we move along. First, let's talk about lemon juice. In 1995, a man by the name of MacArthur Wheeler walked into a bank and proceeded to rob the place. He peered up at the cameras, smiling without a care in the world. His face was put in the news and he was apprehended by the police. Wheeler was absolutely bewildered. "But I wore the juice," he exclaimed as police arrested him. Mr. Wheeler was convinced that if he rubbed lemon juice on his face, he would be rendered invisible to cameras. Interestingly, he wasn't wrong about the effects of lemon juice. It can be used to write a message. It disappears when it's dry and can be viewed again when heat is used. Mr. Wheeler's logic was that the lemon juice was invisible ink and could make anything invisible. David Dunning and his graduate assistant, Justin Kruger, came together to research the links between competence, ability, and inflated self-assessment. They defined incompetence in degrees and not absolutes. A person is incompetent in one area but not all areas. Together they formed 4 predictions for their study. 1. Incompetent individuals would have a gross overestimation of not only their performance in a series of studies but also in their overall ability. 2. Incompetent individuals would not have the metacognitive skills, or awareness and understanding of oneself, to recognize their own incompetence, let alone anyone else's. 3. Because incompetent individuals are unaware of their incompetence, they are unable to gain insight, or learn from their mistakes even when they compare their lack of ability to their peers. And 4. An incompetent individual can only recognize their incompetence by becoming competent, which can be done by giving them metacognitive skills to recognize their performance. There were 4 studies. In each study, the participants were asked to rate their ability and performance in each of the criteria. The first study used humor. Participants would rate a series of jokes that had been picked and rated by a group of professional comedians. The second study used logical reasoning, where they assessed using questions from an LSAT test prep guide. The third measured grammar and consisted of 2 phases. Phase 1, participants had to identify grammatically correct English. In Phase 2, students from the top and bottom quartile were brought back in to resolve the false consensus effect, where the top quartile underestimated their ability because they believed their peers to be around the same skill level as they were. In Study 4, they again measured logical reasoning and gave half of the group a logical reasoning training packet and the other half another unrelated task. What they found from the studies showed anosognosia, where a person is unaware of their condition. To incompetent individuals, they are unaware of their affliction. We also discovered that incompetence isn't with a complete lack of knowledge but rather a limited amount. They found that incompetence encompasses a dual burden: the burden of being incompetent, where they come to incorrect conclusions and make wrong decisions, and the burden of not realizing it. This affliction leads to an unsurmountable amount of confidence from the ill-informed person. This person was found to be rather indifferent to "I don't know." In our society, a prevalent issue is with anti-vaccination. A study found that the people who were against vaccinations were the ones who believed they were more knowledgeable than medical experts. People don't understand vaccines or autism, and they come to conclusions that cause them to not vaccinate their children. They are also more likely to agree with the policy makers who are not experts in either subject. The other fields in which policy makers seem to have very little knowledge about are things like Planned Parenthood. Many go to seek reproductive health care and education because we do not have proper sex education in the U.S. Government programs such as SNAP are subject to criticism by the small percentage of frauds. However, other information shows that food programs have kept families from starving and helped to alleviate some of the stress that comes with living below the poverty line. But lawmakers use those small percentages of frauds to call these people leeches who are lazy and unmotivated, when that simply isn't the case. Here we have a representation of the Dunning-Kruger effect. In the grand scheme of things, we have learned that honesty is underrated. What that means is, We need to teach each other to value constructive criticism for us to grow. This means that we also need to be open to discussions and change, as well as a willingness to be wrong and to admit that you don't know. Thank you.
So to summarize, I chose the Dunning-Kruger effect for my video topic. I'll start with some issues I had while doing this project. One, I have a terrible relationship with my computer. The thing isn't fast enough to keep up with my demands, and it shut down when I was in the middle of doing some research and completing slides. So at one point I had to restart the entire presentation because I lost everything, and decided it would be a better idea to go a different route for the video and the commentary presentation. I initially wanted to make an animated video for this project, so I set time aside to do just that. But I didn't have the right software and I didn't have the knowledge to put it together. I spent like 2 weeks trying to find something that worked. And then with the whole pandemic thing, I didn't have a computer or a laptop for like 3 weeks. And then trying to do an animated video on my phone proved to be very frustrating and very difficult. So I finally found a computer that I could work with, and decided just to change the whole thing to a Prezi or a PowerPoint presentation, that I could record the presentation and upload it. The problem I had with that was that the computer I was working with had terrible audio, so it cuts in and out, and it's a little bit hard to hear some of the things that I'm saying. I think that this audio is also having the same kind of issues, and I don't know how to fix that. Now, why did I choose this topic? So I've learned about the Dunning-Kruger effect fairly recently. From what I understood, it was a question about why do people who know very little about a subject or very little on how to do something, why do they think that they are the most knowledgeable or that they are the best at whatever it is? I've seen my peers and, well, teenagers in general have this mentality. I've watched movies where a protagonist or a side character does something that everyone knows they can't do, but they do it anyways. I, like many others, I would call these characters stupid and say something along the lines of, well, how could they not know that this would work? These people do not ask for help because they do not believe that they need to ask for help. And in the end, they're completely surprised when things go wrong. Some of the most prominent examples of this are from media, from movies, and more specifically horror movies. Interviews with civilians, late night talk shows, sitcom television shows, and various social media sites like Twitter or Facebook. So in essence, I wanted to understand why this occurred. Why did people who are not very well informed about something have such strong opinions? Why did they feel like their input was necessary? What made them believe that they had all the answers? When I investigated the Dunning-Kruger effect, these were some of the things that I set out to find. Where did this cognitive bias stem from? And what does it mean? And what did researchers find? The researchers I'm referring to, as I mentioned in the video, are David Dunning and Justin Kruger, who wanted to examine if there was a relationship between an individual's metacognitive deficits and their miscalibrations of themselves. We wanted an explanations to the questions I mentioned earlier. So I initially became familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect when I was doing a presentation in my oral to communications class. Basically, it was called The Art of Being Wrong. What I found surprising about my findings in both cases was that most of us like to think that it's easy to find faults within ourselves and within others, and then proceed to let them know in order for ourselves and for others to grow. But realistically, it can be very hard to give someone criticism. One, because we don't always know how they're going to react, and two, we're afraid that we may, for lack of a better phrase, hurt their feelings. Now, it may seem ridiculous, but if you think about it, we're taught as children not to hurt each other with our words. We avoid telling people that they're doing something wrong. The problem with this is that we don't learn how to tell someone they're doing something wrong. And we don't learn how to give good constructive criticism, and in return, most of us don't even know how to take criticism. Another thing I found interesting with the Dunning-Kruger effect was the thing called the dual burden, where they essentially explain the entirety of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where a person suffers from two issues: one, not being or making wrong decisions because they came to incorrect conclusions, and two, being unable to recognize it. For most of us, we can find at times that we realize we made a mistake, or we assume something to be true, but then later discover that it wasn't. We're able to learn from that mistake and even grow from it. The Dunning-Kruger effect explains that people who are incompetent don't have the same metacognitive understanding or self-understanding to be able to fix the mistake, and they think in turn that the other person is wrong, so in the end they don't do anything to change it. But I think one of the most surprising things that I found was that these people, it's not that they don't know anything about what they're incompetent in, but rather they at least have some knowledge about it. But something in their mind told them that they're very knowledgeable, more so than experts. But as the dual burden goes, they come to incorrect or misguided conclusions about the thing because they made assumptions about the blanks in their knowledge. So we have some real life examples. Some exaggerated examples of this are like what we call bigots, or someone who thinks everyone's opinion but their own is wrong. This sort of thinking causes the social issues that I mentioned in the video, along with other things like racism, xenophobia, and homophobia. Another example of this effect is the flat earth theory. Now, whether or not you believe in it is completely up to you, but most of it is based on conspiracy theories, pseudoscience, and a crappy Google Earth picture. And then even your friends may have some misguided beliefs and not even realize it. For example, I think most of us as children probably believed that chocolate milk comes from brown cows. Yeah. So, some other avenues of research that we can examine in the discussion portion of the Unskilled and Unaware of It research article, there are some things that went unexplained and some things that weren't taken into account. One unexplained variable was how people who were in the middle quartile of the study also tended to overestimate themselves, but it was by a very small margin compared to that of the people in the bottom quartile. Other variables that were not considered in the study were as stated in the research article, which was motivational or social biases, self-serving trait definitions, where when something good happens, it's because of the person, but when something bad happens, it must be because of external factors or something else that's not related to them. We also have selective recall of past behavior, so like selective memory. And then we also have the tendency to ignore the proficiencies of others. So these were just a few of the things that the researchers thought for further research on the subject. I've looked into more recent articles that show the Dunning-Kruger effect as seen in schools, in politics, businesses, and there was even one article that went into how the Dunning-Kruger effect was mostly a statistical artifact that was based on bias within the study, then went on to state other scales to try and measure incompetence. But for the most part, that concludes my commentary on my video presentation, and thank you very much for listening.